Hey everybody. I don't even know why I'm here to tell you the truth, other than I think Matthew's probably going to wanted to discuss ignorance with somebody who could speak from experience. So that's what I'm doing here. But so I'm just going to let Matthew run with it. Matthew, cool topic, but what do you got? What do you got? What are we doing?
Well, I think, I've been thinking about this, like, what exactly to focus on? What's the point of talking about ignorance itself? Ever since I suggested to you earlier that we have this hangout on this topic. And the way that I think that it makes most sense to me to make it, something actually worth talking about, worth thinking about, is first to look at what exactly is ignorance and whether or not it's a good or a bad thing and why. So just ignorance itself, I mean, like when a baby's born, right? Baby's ignorant of pretty much everything, right? They got to
Yeah.
learn everything about how to be a functioning human being, a functioning creature of any kind to survive. And at first, it doesn't matter how much they learn, they're never going to be able to take care of themselves due to physiological limitations. So ignorance isn't technically a bad thing. We all start out ignorant. So what is ignorance itself, the way we use it in an adult context, and what's good and bad about it? So I wanted to see what you thought about it.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think I agree. In fact, I don't think ignorance is in it's not bad unless you're willfully trying to remain that way. And what I mean by that is there's a quote, and I always forget who said this, but um, it goes something like this. I'm sure I'm going to butcher it, and somebody's going to tell me. But it are you looking for truth, or are you looking for a belief? Are you looking for comfort? And I think that sometimes when there are certain beliefs out there that need you to remain ignorant. You don't want to know. And in those cases, uh, I think that that can really get to be problematic. Um, Now, on the other hand, there can be an argument made for wanting to remain ignorant because of the pain that it's going to cause you if you weren't. People always bring up the deal that, well, what if your wife was cheating on you? Would you want to know? That's a tough question. In some ways, yeah. In other ways, especially if it was just a one-off event and she knows that, or she really feels horrific about it and would never do it again, I don't know. I don't know what purpose it would serve for me and her to have to go through that pain. So I agree. I think trying to define ignorance as always a bad thing, um, I don't think you can get there. I think there is times where ignorance actually needs to happen. So does that help at all? Or
You know what? Well, you know what I think the perfect, yeah, and what you were saying just made me realize the perfect way for me to express what I wanted to say about ignorance is to talk about what happened on my date the other day.
yeah, okay, that's interesting, no doubt.
Yeah, that will definitely definitely make for an interesting topic of discussion. I met somebody online, saw pictures, talked on the phone several times, and I went to meet her for a lunch date. Saw pictures, heard, you know, background information, getting to know each other kind of stuff. And I don't think over the phone and based on the pictures, I had any doubts at all about her saying, her being who she said she was. But it turned out, obviously, um, that she wasn't. So the pictures that people put up of themselves online are not usually accurate for what they really look like, especially right now. Like the pictures that you put up of yourself, you're trying to show your best face, your good side. When you were at your most healthy. You know, when you were in your best shape, when you had your hair done just the way you wanted it to be, or in your case, you know, since you're a bald bastard, um, when you had your head shined properly. Um, I can't really say anything. I just cut off all my hair too.
I was going to say,
Anyway,
you're not looking.
um,
Yeah, your icon maybe is not quite as closely shaved as mine, but it's pretty damn close there, big guy.
anyway, the pictures that I got, and there were at least two or three, I don't remember exactly, but the pictures I got showed.
Hmm. Matthew, if you can still hear us, I lost you on this end. Um, I know your internet connection's bad, and that's why you wanted me to do this. So uh, text me by phone or Skype or something else if you lost the connection, and I'll just hang out and try to entertain the, what, 7 people we have, or however many we have watching now. Just a shout out also. Just wanted to make sure Lasoyo, I think it's Sinners and Saints or Fat Overlords now, their show is going to start in about 15 minutes. And the whole purpose, at least on my part here, was to make sure that we drug as many of his viewers away from there as we possibly could. Because, you know, of course, we can't have any atheist watching a Christian's channel. So I really appreciate at least the 7 people not going over to Lasoyo now and over here. So we kind of affected his viewer count at least a little bit. Lasoyo watching. There you go, brother. Seriously though, guys, if you get a chance, you definitely need to go over there. Lasoyo's a good guy, and they do put on a pretty entertaining show for the most part. And I am kind of bummed that we got, I guess, kind of stepping on each other a little bit tonight, because I really wanted to see what their show was about. And the topic was supposed to be the inerrancy of the Bible. And he originally had G-Man set up to come on and prove that the Bible is completely inerrant, which, you know, I thought might be interesting. I would like to see how he plans on doing that. But again, Matthew definitely takes precedence, and we figured we'd go on. And I got to be honest, I didn't even think about the Sinners and Saints when Matthew joined.
Can you hear me?
Me too. Hey, you're back.
Hey, you're back, man. Yeah, I'm just going to talk on my phone, and to hell with my satellite connection out of here. The 4G connection I've got on my phone is a whole lot better. Okay, so what was the last thing you heard besides you being a bald bastard?
That's what really sticks. All right, so get some feedback on your show.
What was the last thing that you heard?
You were talking about the problem of people's online pictures being, let's say, not current.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So I'm gonna, refrain from referring to all of the women I've dated over the years by name, who gave me pictures of themselves from when they were 18, when I met them in their 30s. Anyway, so the more I spent in this lunch date with this girl, the more I noticed that she didn't look very much like her pictures. It was obviously still her, but she wasn't a very attractive woman, as far as I was concerned. So at the end of the date, after like 3 or 4 hours of talking and getting to know each other, and very intelligent, very intelligent, very engaging, just not much chemistry. And at the very end of the date, she says, "I have something to tell you, but I don't want you to be mad. I'm not my kid's mother, I'm their father." And now that I look back on it, I should have noticed that either she was formerly a man and now had undergone a sex change operation, or was still a man. I don't know, because she had breasts. So I don't know. At any rate, I'm thinking now, I should have known. I should have figured it out. I'm a pretty perceptive guy. I saw plenty of signs, like the shape of the physique and everything, that this was not someone who was at least physically born as a woman. And I don't have anything against people who have to go through things like that. But my point is, I'm wondering now how much of my ignorance about what she said, the shock that I had when I found out, how much of that was due to my hopefulness that that wasn't the case. How much of it did I already know or already understand, just didn't acknowledge? So what I'm trying to say is, how much of our ignorance is self-imposed limitations, and how much of it is just a wall of not figuring something out because you can't. So in other words, how much of what we don't know is because we're keeping ourselves from knowing it, and how much of it is something that we cannot know? Because I think we have a tendency to build what ends up being called a worldview in this great debate, a philosophical framework of beliefs, a formulated epistemology where everything makes sense internally and externally, as the best that we can anyway. But that's just a box that we try to fit everything into to make sense of things to ourselves and to everyone else. That doesn't have anything to do with the actual state of things. It's just a way to conceptualize and communicate the way we see the world. But there is still always going to be that element of ignorance. And, to go back to the example I'm giving of this date that I had, I don't really know if what I experienced, the shock at the end of the date when I found out, how much of that was due to me just having it finally hit home, all the things I had already figured out and just hadn't put two and two together, and how much of it was me just having not the slightest clue that I had missed something like that. I have no idea. But the ignorance factor of it, I still can't figure out how much of that was self-imposed and how much of that was something I couldn't have figured out no matter how hard I tried. So when someone's lying to you, when someone is deliberately misrepresenting themselves or telling you something that isn't true, even if they don't realize they're lying, how much of that is your responsibility and how much of it is theirs? How much of your ignorance is your fault as far as culpability is concerned, and how much of it is just the state of things? Anyway, that's just a basic framework of what I wanted to talk about as far as ignorance is concerned.
Yeah, and I think that's cool. And you're echoing bad, because it's hard for me not to stumble over myself. I think it's even echoing through to the live feed. There you go. That sounds a lot better. I guess the culpability issue, I think the first thing is that you have to want to know. Like I said before, I think there's situations where people don't want to know. They're comfortable in their lives. They like their beliefs. And even if they could find the truth, I think in a lot of cases it's too painful. They don't want to know. It kind of goes back to, reminds me of when I was in college, and this is quite a while. This is when AIDS was big and whatever, and so there was a time when we were giving blood to make money, and that's one of the things that we did on the side. You get $20 for giving a pound of blood, and that pays for your drinking that night. Not to mention you're low on blood, so you don't have to drink as much. So it's a win-win, at least in our stupid, But there was so many times that I worried about coming home and getting the message from the blood bank that they needed to talk to me because I may be HIV positive. That was the big scare back then. And I got to tell you, at least back in those days, it was like, I don't want to know, which is horrible when you think about it, because it wasn't like I was doing anything other than just having, protected sex or whatever, to protect anyone else from what I could have potentially passed on. But luckily, of course, I didn't have anything, and nothing happened. But I think that in that instance, if I suspected that I did, then yes, I would have been completely culpable, and even to the point of legally responsible for causing others harm. Um, and I don't think there would be many people out there that would have been very, if they were on a jury, very sympathetic to me saying, well, the pain that I have to go through knowing that I've got to live with AIDS now, I just didn't want to know. I don't think that would have gotten me off the hook or even made it a justifiable action to myself. I think hopefully anyway, I would have felt horrible about it. So as far as the culpability, I think the first issue is you have to want to know. Um, so in your instance, in this last thing, um, I mean, maybe she was a nice person. Maybe, like you said, she was intelligent. It was someone fun to hang out with. She's cool to talk to. So even though those physical signs or whatever you're talking about that you said you should have picked up on, um, you really don't want that to be the case, because at least some level you like this person, and you want to keep hanging out with them.
Okay, I've plugged in headphones now. Tell me if your echo is gone.
Okay, let me see. Yep, it's gone now. That's perfect. That's
Okay.
a whole lot better.
Yeah, I'm going to use headphones maybe from my phone. Maybe that'll help. Um, I think that this is the core dynamic of what I wanted to get at, and I'm glad that the discussion has gone this way. Um, it really is about whether or not you want to know. I mean, maybe there's something that you just can't handle accepting as true. There's something that is unthinkable to you. Or, it may also be that you just have no experience predicting something like that. It's never happened to you before. It's always been in movies or something like that. Or it might be that the reality of the situation is so scary, so unnerving, and makes you so distressed that you just avoid it for psychological reasons. So I think that is much bigger than any talk about theism or atheism. That is just about who we are as people. What you want to be true or don't want to be true has a lot to do with how prepared you are to accept the reality of the situation.
Yeah, I agree. But I mean, where I do think it overlaps with what we do here, at least mostly on YouTube, is with the fact that when, let's say that we have ironclad 100% evidence, I do think that there are people out there that would not want to know if that evidence was indicative of, let's say, a different God, not their God, or no God all, however you could get to that point. Proving a negative's idiotic, but let's say that we could demonstrate that the God of the Bible was not correct and Hinduism is definitively, objectively what is real. Um, I still think that there would be people that don't want to know. And I don't know if I blame them that much. I mean, it's frustrating when you run into someone like that, but at the same time, I can understand, why they're that guarded and that hesitant to let go of something that potentially they vested most of their life into, um, at least from an emotional standpoint, if not a monetary standpoint, depending on what their profession is, and on and on. So I don't know what to say as far as what is, I hate to use this term, but objectively right. Should they um, be forced into the light, so to speak, or is it okay to kind of continue to believe in Santa Claus, for lack of a better term?
Well, I think that I would be remiss not to mention the objectivity aspect of the moral obligation you're talking about. From a non-believer's perspective, the only objectivity has to do with us being part of a social species, and we have standards of inclusion and exclusion, what's allowed and what's not allowed as far as society is concerned, intersubjectively. Um, that to me is the only real physical standard to go by. The real, like, something that can actually be traced back to reality instead of just speculation. So what's going to get you kicked out of all of society at some point, it varies depending on the society. But I think that the important difference there is to imagine, because this is the difference that gets brought up so much in these discussions with believers, is that being able to imagine an objectivity that supersedes a moral ought that supersedes the mores of society. Is that a realistic standard? Just because there might be a narrative throughout civilization. Let's say, since we can trace back our biology all the way back down to the very beginning of the abiogenesis, however it happened, life began there somehow. Now, let's say that there was some other species that evolved into an intelligent, conscious race or species of thinkers, builders, in some ways equivalent to us, and they were wiped out by one of the extinction events that happened sometime in the past. Then that group would have, if they had our same level of capabilities intellectually, and they were wiped out, would their standards, their morals, their usage of logic and reason and mathematics and all of the other tools that we have available to us, they would have theoretically been the same for them. And at a very basic level, any aliens that we meet that have similar capabilities as we do would also have the same basic framework, because reality is the same for everything. It's all what you start with. On a different planet, there are still going to be the same elements. They're going to be called different things, and things are going to function different as far as the environment is concerned. Say what if this intelligent race on another planet lives underwater, and they develop underwater, but they're still builders and thinkers like we are. Well, they're still going to be subject to the laws of the universe, because it's the universe. So this other species I'm talking about, in, say, 1 billion years ago, say they were an aberration that just developed, they were there for a few thousand years or 100,000 years, and then they were gone, just a blip on the radar of the history of the Earth, like we might be. The standards of reality don't change. The only thing that changes is how we perceive reality. So the ignorance that we have, the limitations that we have of what we will allow ourselves to accept about reality, those have to do with, I think, where we start and where we intend to go, what we value, what we think our purpose is. So there is some intentionality there. I've been doing a lot of videos lately on free will and dualism and things like this, and I think that there's a lot that we don't understand. But the question is, why don't we understand it? Is that a self-imposed limitation, or is it an actual limitation. Like they used to say that you couldn't run faster than 440 for a mile, and now people are running faster than that. But there's still only so fast you can go. So that's a wall that we don't seem to be able to pass without making some sort of enhancement to the human body. So there are these limitations that we have. You know, you can only jump so high off the ground, etc. But the limitation of being able to understand something, how much of that is self-imposed?
Well, to me, especially in today's society, there's very few things that you couldn't, if you wanted to, go out and research on your own, at least get a layman's understanding of, through Coursera, through edX, just through YouTube. I mean, look at Khan Academy on YouTube. You can learn pretty much from square one all the way up through fairly advanced calculus on the Khan Academy. So if you can learn that type of, say, complicated and extremely complex mathematics, there's very few things out there that you can't learn. Now, again, I mean, I understand there are going to be certain individuals that do have, educational limitations. Their 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 mental capacity is not going to be there, but on average, I think, especially being an educator, there are very few people that I've run across that don't have the physical capability of understanding extremely complex ideas, again, at least at a layman's level. So I think it all boils down to the desire. Do you want to know? And if you do, for the most part, you can find out for free. It's not going to cost you anything but some time.
So to piggyback off of that, the desire to learn as much as possible, is that a moral objective? Is that a moral obligation that we have?
Now,
And if so, how would you establish that?
I don't know if I would call it a moral objective. I don't think it's an ought if you want to get there. Even if I use my little test of society, I don't think that is a necessary ought. Um, what I do think is that if you are going to attempt to spread your beliefs, then yes, it is incumbent on that person to make sure that they have done everything in their power to make sure that those beliefs, at least in their mind, have been vetted to reflect reality. And that's where I think I really have a problem, is that when there are people out there that are on both sides of the fence, and the best word I know is preaching, and I mean atheists preach. But if you're going to go out and you're going to try to, I guess, recruit people into your belief system, I really think it might behoove you to at least make sure that you can back up that belief system with some type of at least logical and rational um, processes. If not, and again, this is my biases, I would like to see some physical evidence. But again, that may be going a little bit too far.
Well, let's to bring this back to building a philosophical framework to make sense of things to yourself and make sense of things to everyone else. I've noticed a proclivity among philosophically minded people to try to make their understanding of reality as internally and apparently externally consistent as possible, as some sort of bragging right that they just have a better system. But I think that is the more you build into the box of this set of beliefs, where you have from start to finish a more complete narrative of the way things really are, so that it is internally consistent, it's very easy to have that pull you away from the actual state of things, yet you would adhere to it because it is, it has to be that way. It's like watching an action movie where the bad guy has to die. Well, what if the bad guy doesn't die? What if the bad guy wins? People don't usually like action movies like that. People want to see the bad guy die because of the things he's done. He's killed the good guy's girlfriend. He's been manipulating him from the start. All of this stuff. He needs to die at the end. That's just the way people expect action movies to go. But what if he doesn't? What if he kills the good guy's entire family, and walks off into the sunset, even though he's the bad guy? People are not going to like that. So the expectation of what people are trying to find, because it matches the way they see things, can be a dead end in a lot of ways. And I think that as far as cultural evolution is concerned, say Greek mythology, Egyptian mythology, these things, for one reason or another, are not believed in. They're not accepted anymore. They don't fit anymore. They don't match reality. So once, say, idealism, once it is no longer, or verificationism, once it doesn't match the world anymore, then people stop accepting it. Most people do anyway. Then you've got the people who deny the moon landing, and then you've got, et cetera, ad nauseum. There are always going to be people who are still stuck in their box of, this is the way I want things to be, this is the way I want to see things, and they stop referring back to the way things actually are. So that is, I think, a self-imposed ignorance. But how much of it is something they are responsible for? How much of it has to do with who they are and what they need or think they need, versus how much they have an actual power to change? So ignorance itself, I think, I don't know, I think it all ties back to how you think, oughts, the oughts of purpose, of ethics, of all of these things that are central to any philosophical endeavor. I think there still has to be some sort of flexibility, and that is something that a lot of people cannot handle. They can't handle the flexibility of always allowing the possibility that they're wrong, always adding that variable of ignorance in themselves. It's like in a scientific experiment where you have to, you have the control, and you maybe even, there's even a placebo involved, but you have these variables set in place that you accept about yourself, first and foremost, before you go anywhere, and assuming that you have the objective absolute truth of things, and your understanding of reality makes more sense than anyone else's, and they're wrong for not accepting it. And then building your understanding of reality on top of that, regardless of how it actually is, that, I think, is how extinction happens as far as culture is concerned. And that's what we're seeing now. People say the internet is killing religion. In a lot of ways, parts of it, yes, but it also depends on how satisfying it is to people. And people will always need that satisfaction. So I think it's just going to evolve. It's going to change. But the ignorance also, it's always going to be there. The need for satisfaction and the ignorance go hand in hand. I'm sorry, I'm in a ranty mood tonight.
No, man. I mean, that's yeah. I like you talking. I mean, it allows me to sit back and think, which is convenient because I usually don't do that very quickly. Um, so, getting back to your last point, you were saying that, if I heard you right, that the ignorance is necessary for that pleasure aspect, for that comfort level. And therefore, people are going to either consciously or subconsciously remain ignorant to chase that pleasure. Am I hitting that right?
Yeah, I think that's right. Like a willful ignorance to maintain satisfaction in not. I won't go so far as to call it a self-delusion, but it is sort of like optimism versus pessimism. To look at things positively or negatively, and hopefully or cynically, I guess you could say. I don't think that that's a delusion. I think that that's just more of an outlook. And again, I'm not sure how much of that is um, something that people can be responsible for or not. How much of what we think and feel is something we are responsible for? I haven't the slightest idea. I think responsibility is a concept that we apply on top of being a living, thinking being. There's a lot that we apply on top of being a living, thinking being that it all builds into this philosophical framework that we make to try to make sense of things. And that you always have to add in that variable of ignorance. You always have to accept that it's there. And I think that the biggest hindrance to having an accurate understanding of reality is assuming you are absolutely correct and you cannot be wrong. To deny your own ignorance is the first step to it's just basically giving yourself over to it and pretending like it's not there. It becomes your reality. Ignorance becomes your reality. And that, I think, is as close to um, uh, philosophical suicide as you can get.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. I think that allowing yourself to willingly avoid certain topics, certain issues, that's the only place it can end is with a stagnation. And I mean, the old saying, if you don't change, you die. Um, and I think that's where you end up. You end up with a place in your life to where you're almost afraid to venture out. And again, I think we see this sometimes in older people where they don't want to even turn on the TV from time to time. I had that next door neighbor who was 97 years old that died last year, and there were certain things that he did not want to talk about. He did not like computers. He did not like cell phones. And I think because he remembers back 50 years ago and enjoyed that time and really wants to remain there, which in some ways I can understand, but in other ways, the things that he missed out on the last 10, 20 years of his life, just I can't imagine doing that. Now I say that I'll be 97, I'll be the same guy sitting over there saying I don't want to hear about whatever's the newest thing. But it, I think you're right. I think that once you decide that you're happy with how you believe life to be, and therefore I'm not looking anymore, you're done. You're not going to grow anymore, at least not intellectually.
Do you think that it's even? I really like to open this up to bring people in, and that's the
Okay.
reason that I asked you to host this, because obviously my internet connection is just crap. So,
Yeah.
do you think that it is relevant? I mean, even realistic to apply responsibility to this?
Well, see, and when you said that before, I was thinking on that, and I think that I don't know if it's so much apples to oranges, but to me, responsibility is contingent on the person's actions, what they're doing with that information or lack thereof. And what I mean is that if I go out and I just knowingly um, tell people things that are going to hurt them, every person I walk up to that is overweight, I go, you are way fat and you're probably going to die in less than 10 years. I mean, Are they ignorant of that fact? I don't know. They may be self-deluded, and they may not, think that they are that overweight and whatever. And so am I, to be honest. But um, what I'm saying is that I think that trying to trying to make it into um, something that someone could be held accountable for has to do with what their intent is. And if it's completely internal, to me, as long as that internal ignorance does not affect negatively anybody around them, I mean, like my 97-year-old, it didn't hurt anybody for him to be completely unaware of how the internet worked, or cell phones for that matter, or even how a new car works for the most part. That really didn't harm anyone other than himself. So in that instance, if it's, and again, I guess I'm going to have to, because of course the way that this always seems to end up is back to religion. Let's say someone completely believes, they've always believed, and they purposely avoid anything that's going to contradict those beliefs because they don't want to know. Now, if they're going to do that internally, and they're not going to judge, they're not going to um, vote based on that type of thing, they're not going to do anything that affects anyone else, I don't know if I have that big of a problem with it. On the other hand, if they're going to be active and go out and recruit people, support candidates based on those beliefs, vote in that way, restrict others' freedoms because of those beliefs, then I think that they can be culpable. Because if you're going to take actions, go ahead.
Let me ask you something. Let me ask you something about that then.
Yeah.
Because I think I probably agree with you on this, but just to play devil's advocate for the sake of the audience, and again, I'd like to open this up soon to people who want to come in. Let's finish what we're talking about here.
Okay.
I think that it's important to point out that the moral ought that we keep begging the question about when we talk about the way things should be in society, it is based on the survival of the species. That's sort of it's a very nebulous concept. It's like the species itself, of which we are a part, values itself, and because it values itself, and we are part of it, then we value it, and we value ourselves because we're a part of it. It's it is like you've said in the past. We are part of the team. And you support your team because you're on the team, or you are a huge fan of the team. But since you value it, it is the basis of your value system. So, since we are part of a social species, if we seek to survive and be a part of our species and thrive in that species, if we value that, then it makes sense to maximize our inclusion in that society. But there's always, the self-reflection aspect of being a conscious thinking being that creates the feedback, self-reflection, self-analysis, self-doubt, and that's where all of these moral questions, the philosophy ends up coming from, I think. But my point is, the point that you're making about where a religious behavior or any such behavior, a fundamentalist of any kind type of behavior, where that hits the wall of no longer being acceptable or no longer being tolerable, has to do with the survival of the species. Like if there was somebody in a position of power who had their finger on the button to launch nukes, then in most cases, if someone tried to push that button, there would be millions of people who were, if they were in a position to stop them, would do it. And that only really has to do with preservation of the species. So when someone has a push that they're trying to make for their moral ought that goes against the survival of the species and the survival of um, basically anyone else by proxy, by inclusion, then that is where I think the majority of the pushback comes, as far as things like uh, creationism in schools and the abortion discussion and divorce and all of these things that have such a fundamental effect on society itself, on the human species, the collective that we are all a part of. That is the ultimate arbiter. No matter what your religion is, no matter how you see your role in society, you're still part of it being a human being, just by the fact that you are a human being. That's just the way it is, and there's no real point in arguing it. If everyone's memory was wiped clean of all human advancement, everything we've learned about technology and everything else, we would still be starting from the fact that we are all human beings. That's how we would rebuild everything. So that is where I think the long and the short of it is where we get our moral ought for pushing back against, um, like what you were saying with your neighbor. He wasn't hurting anyone. Well, some of things that what if he got in his car, even though he couldn't see anymore, and he was driving down the street and ran over a kid? Well, the fact that he was driving when he shouldn't have been, since he couldn't see, that is when he crosses the point of the way he wants things to be is no longer acceptable. Like they say, your freedom to swing your fist is, it stops when someone else's knows. I think that is the general framework of everything as far as social inclusion and moral ought in society are concerned. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah, and I agree, and that's what I'm saying. As long as he wanted to camp out in his house and just live in his own little bubble, yeah, I think it's going to be pretty hard to mandate that he gets out and learns anything. But like you said, the second that he crosses that line and his actions affect others, then yeah, I think it is. I don't know. I hesitate to use this word, but I think that it ought to be mandated that if you're going to take action, those actions should be as informed, at least based on some mechanism to validate what you're doing is based on what's real. It's not just, I like this and I want everybody else to follow me. No, I'm saying this because I have vetted it somehow. And that's where we start to get into problems, because one person's methodology to verify what they believe to be, um, it can get problematic, to say the least. So, um, didn't know how you wanted to proceed here. Were there certain people you had in mind, or do you just want to
No,
post it?
I absolutely. I think we should just post it in the comments, and anybody who wants to come in can come in, and just leave it completely open like that. If you're okay with that, I mean, it's
All
your
right.
it's your hangout, your channel. You can handle it however you want, but that's what I
I
was
mean,
thinking.
well, like you said, I mean, it's more your hangout. And the only reason that we're doing it this way is because your internet sucks. So no, I mean, I definitely do it this way. In fact, I'm posting it right now. So guys, first come, first serve. I mean, we only have 22, so I'm sure it won't fill up too terribly fast. But at the same time, anybody that wants in and wants to join, feel free. We definitely, I, I, I would like to hear from other people. There have been some some interesting comments in the comment section. So
No, I'm not watching any of that, but I just want to say at the start here that I've had a rough day, and I'm not in the mood to tolerate any bullshit. If people want to come in and troll, I'm not in the mood for it. This hangout was to talk. It's to have a discussion about a topic and not just to do drama bullshit. So,
right.
um, like I don't really feel like, you know massaging anyone's egos or playing politics here is what I'm trying to say.
No, I agree. I mean, and again, I think both of us are pretty much on the same page with that. Is that, oh, you know me, I like to play with the trolls a lot of times, but at the same time, there's the days where it's just like, you know what, we're not going to do this. And if you've had one of those days, man, I have no problem with, bouncing people if they're going to play those little games.
All right,
So,
cool.
somebody, I posted it in the comments, at least I think I did, the link. So if anyone has tried that and been unable to either see it or actually get in, uh, let me know in the comments section and I'll try to repost. But it
What you
should be
might
there.
do,
Yeah.
you might post the link in the event comments, and people should have more access to it there.
Okay. And I'll see if I can get over there since now I'm going to have to go back to the other way. Um, hey, we got Heavy Hauler.
Is that Heavy Hauler on camera? Oh my
Oh,
goodness.
Yeah, I've had a camera for a while, but I haven't been into Hangouts too much lately.
How's it going?
Oh, pretty good. How about y'all?
Good.
not bad.
I
This
think
actually, go ahead. I'm sorry.
oh, no, I was going to say, y'all pretty much hit a lot because I'm thinking, well, maybe this and maybe that, and then, oh, you already said it. So, but I was just going to say that, and y'all probably said it, and I may be saying it slightly different. Willful ignorance is like a defense mechanism, and I think y'all covered that. You don't want to learn a certain thing and find out that it is correct and conflicts with your worldview or whatever, because you're happy where you're at and you're content and it works for you, but you're not being true to yourself, and you know that, and that can cause problems too, inside sometimes how you react with other people. So the willful ignorance is a defense mechanism because you don't want to admit that you've made an error somewhere or you really need to change how things are or something. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it does. Go ahead,
I
Matthew.
think that's exactly what I was thinking when I mentioned that date I had, because I'm wondering, was that willful ignorance on my part, not noticing that he or she used to be a man? Did I just not notice that his body was shaped a little different, or what? What was it? Could I have figured it out? And I think that using that as an example of my own willful ignorance and looking at it from that way, where was it willful ignorance? And I don't know. Could it have been? It definitely could have been. But as far as like any belief that you end up building that something is the case, how much of that is like a workable position, and how much of it is like you're just saying, okay, I don't really care about this, I don't really want to think about it, and just move from there?
Well, you couldn't really say that you was being ignorant or maybe caught some things and didn't want to notice it or something. Like there's some guys when they're going through this or whatever, they really look, like women or whatever, they can. But I know, I'm sure you've seen that there are some women that are very stocky or hefty or whatever, and they look a lot like a man. Like I saw one lady from the back, and I was thinking, boy, that is a big man or whatever, and it stood and the stance and everything. And then I looked around and went, oh, it's a girl, completely wrong. But Adam's apple, that'd be a dead giveaway if you saw that and didn't pay any attention to it. or maybe the hands, might have been a giveaway. But no, I don't think that you were being willfully ignorant or anything as far as like the pictures are concerned. What you saw, this is what you accepted, and it looked like, a woman.
And there were a lot of lies there too, but I understand. Yeah, if I had seen an Adam's apple, that would be one thing, but I didn't. But see, a lot of that can be concealed by body weight too. So there's, I don't know.
That's true.
I don't know, but I'm trying to, and I know negation is too, trying to keep this at a level of the larger issue of ignorance, willful or not, in society, instead of just just religion as, because willful ignorance is on both sides. Ignorance itself is just a part of being a human being, and I think that that's a very important fact of who we are. We're always going to be ignorant of something.
Oh yeah, I was going to say, no one knows everything about any one thing, and what we do know is just the tip of the iceberg. There's a whole lot of things out there that I'm ignorant about, and I don't really need to learn it, because it doesn't, whether I knew it or accepted it or not, would not affect any kind of internal beliefs or anything. It's just things that they just don't matter, really. Like I don't need to know how to fly an airplane. So.
Yes, you do. What are you talking about? Everybody needs to learn how to fly an airplane.
Except in extreme emergencies.
I don't know if you know that, Heavy, but that's what I do. I'm a flight instructor, so that's why I said.
Oh, that's awesome.
Who else we got in here? Rory, I think, is the only name that's showing up for me on my phone here.
Yeah, hi.
Hello.
Hey. Hello.
I just wanted to say, I think one of the things that's hard when in overcoming ignorance, or overcoming people's ignorance, is we've taken such strong sides. For example, I send people that disagree with me lots of stuff. Like I'll send a creationist something about evolution, and they won't even read it because it's like, oh, that's information from those evolutionists, so I don't have to pay attention to that. And I've done that.
To play devil's advocate, though, how much of creationists, how much of their information that they send you do you look at? Now, that's not to say that they're right. That just means that's how they look at it. Like,
right.
They have a ready answer for it, just like you do. It's a question of reality. Obviously, it's going to be one way or another. Creationism is either right or it's not.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm trying to look at it at the broader picture of, being willing to look at your own position and at least consider, I could be wrong about Big Bang, about evolution, about everything. I could be. Well, what you do when you want to know if you're right or not? You go back to the fact of the matter and start from there, and then build your understanding of reality on top of it instead of the other way around. And I think that's how you end up rejecting creationism. So I assume that's what you're doing when you send them the information, that you're hoping that they'll do it that way. But I can promise you that at least in some cases, that is how it's being received by creationists, that you are not at all looking at reality. But that's the real core of this issue, I think.
Yeah, when a creationist sends me something, I have read it. I read it. A lot of it is the same stuff over and over again. So sometimes at this point, I'll mostly skim it, whereas before I'd read the arguments. But now at this point, if I read it, if I skim it, and it's all the same thing that I've known they've been saying, then I do tend to ignore it. But I've been trying to be better at it. Like if someone sends me an article from Fox News, I'll still read it and I'll still try to see if there's some truth in it, and I'll compare it with what I know, compare it with what other people are saying about it. And I try not to dismiss things offhand just because they're coming from the other side. And I think that's really how you should do things, or quote unquote should.
I think the companion point to go along with this is sort of how do we establish the moral ought of having an accurate understanding of reality. If the moral ought that someone is starting with is what God wants, or what my my fellow believers in God tell me that God wants, etc. If that is the beginning of your moral oughts, then the actual state of reality, to me, it logically follows that it would be less important. Any conflicting information, conflicting evidence, ideas, logic itself that doesn't match up to, starting with moral oughts being based off of this nebulous concept of God, that is going to obviously create some cognitive dissonance, and I think that's a huge source of willful ignorance. But that, I think, it's the real problem here, is starting with, where do you base your moral oughts? Where do they begin, and where should they begin? It's a moral ought where your moral oughts should begin. That's the real, head shrinker here.
Yeah, and that's a really difficult hurdle to get people to overcome. I don't really know how, honestly.
Well, to me, it boils back to, again, what do you want? The biggest problem that I see is not having the desire to move out of that comfort zone, whatever it is. And yeah, I mean, I guess the question that you need, all of us, was definitive, objective, undeniable evidence that, let's say, the God of the Bible was true. Would we rather live the way we live now? Would we rather accept that as a fact if it was a fact? I mean, anybody on the panel, I mean, would you want to know, or would having that overlord, having that person looking at you 24/7, knowing that everything that you know and everything that you do, have done, and will do will be scrutinized?
I'll let these other guys answer, but I just want to point out that no matter what you say, there are believers out there who won't believe you. You can say from until the cows come home, yes, I want to know, but they're not going to believe you. So that's a brick wall that we're not really able to get over. Doesn't matter how sincere you are, you're lying, obviously.
Right, but it's the same. It's the same thing as everything else. I mean, you can answer any way you want to. I mean, it is the internet, and just like you got catfished. I mean, you can make yourself in anything you want to be, and I'm sure there's people out there who do. And so whatever you say here can be complete BS. Again, it's the question is not for me or the audience or anything else. I think where the question becomes powerful is when you internalize it and really test yourself. Would I want to know? And answer yourself, not anyone else. I mean, so anyhow, go from there.
If there was evidence or something, if something convinced me that, I'm not going to say the God of the Bible, or if there was a God and there was a way to know this deity and relate to him or her, whatever, to be a part of what this God is, or whatever. Yes, I'd like to know, because that would be the most fantastic thing in life, to know the Creator, the one that did all this amazing stuff. I mean, that would be awesome. I mean, that would be more valuable than anything you can think of. If I was convinced of the existence of this being, yes, I would want to know. And if there was, but I'm not convinced. So.
Right. And I mean, Rory, I don't want to step on you. I know you got unmuted. What do you have to chime in on?
Oh, about what you just said, or about anything.
I don't want to constrain you. I mean, if you had something else to add, feel free. I thought that was that popped into my mind as an interesting question, and so I threw it out there. But if you got something else, feel free.
Okay. I think another problem is I don't think the problem is, for me, the problem isn't so much that people are ignorant. It's that the problem comes when people try to influence things that they're ignorant about. And I think you guys were touching on that before you let anyone in. It's like, I mean, I'm ignorant about cars. I don't really know anything about cars, but it's like if I'm ignorant about cars and I try to influence how they're made, it just doesn't really make sense if I don't know anything about it.
But the thing about that is, you could learn.
Yeah.
If you were interested, you could learn about cars. You could learn about flying. Like Heavy Hauler said, he doesn't know anything about planes. Well, you could learn if you were so inclined. You could learn. There's very few things out there that you couldn't learn that are established to be true as far as empiricism is concerned. You could, given the right tools, given the right people to work with, etc. availability of the evidence used in experiments, that sort of thing, you could figure it out.
Oh
And
yeah,
that's it's a very seductive standard to judge everything by, but we can't limit ourselves to that either, because there are a lot of things out there that are accepted as true that can't be empirically verified. And I mean, cars are a good example, but I mean, as far as like we've been talking about moral oughts, there's no way to establish that empirically, but um, it doesn't change the fact of reality either.
hmm yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah, and I could learn about cars, and then if I learned about cars, then I would be justified in trying to influence how they were made or whatever. But I think in a lot of cases, it's a case of people putting the cart before the horse. They want to influence something before they're knowledgeable about it, before taking the time to learn about what they're trying to influence.
Hmm. That to me brings up a kind of an interesting question, at least to me, that the people that are trying to influence, as Rory said, do you think those people do consider themselves ignorant, or do they really believe that they are at least sufficiently educated on this whatever's the subject might be, to be able to go out and start to try to influence people?
2 words: Dunning-Kruger.
Yeah, pretty
So
much.
you're saying the latter. You're saying that, which it, I guess to me, it boils down to, there's an old saying that if something's important to you, you'll find a way. If it's not important, you'll find an excuse. And when, to me, reality, what is it? Just like, Heavy Holler was saying, it's important to me anyway that my beliefs are accurate, that what I conceive of my life being is actually reflective of what it really is. So, like Heavy was saying, if there's a God out there, I want to know. I mean, off and on, I've been doing this for 30 something years and gone through some fairly rigorous tests, if you will, trying to chase down that fact. But the the problem, going back to the cognitive dissonance, or the Dunning-Kruger that you're talking about, is that I think, again, a lot of people like the thought of whatever their belief is, and therefore they're going to only find a way to bolster that belief, which is not knowledge, which is, you're still ignorant to potentially the entire other side of the argument. And I'm talking on both sides here. I mean, I've known plenty of atheists that have no idea about any religion, let alone the one that they're fighting. It's just religion's bad, beat the drum, on and on and on. So I think that's the test. I think that you can look, and again, it's an internal test. Look at yourself and say, do I really want to know? And if I do, what have I actually done to validate what I think I know as actually being true? And if you're, well, I don't have time, if I don't have this, if I don't, those are excuses. It must not be that important to you, or you would find a way to do it.
I hate appealing back to movies so much, but I think they're such um, a good art form to express life itself. Um, let's take something like um, 2001: A Space Odyssey. If you recommend that to somebody, you've got your own motivations for recommending that to someone. I think it's one of the best science fiction movies of all time. It is very difficult to watch at times, depending on what you expect. But if you just want to appreciate the art of it, the fact that it is a good movie as far as movies go, judged against the quality of the production itself, the direction, the music, cinematography, all of it, just to respect the art form of it. That's one thing. But what if your goal your expectation in watching movies is to be entertained. Well, there's a good chance you're not going to be entertained by that movie. It's very long and drawn out and very slow at places. And if your expectation is, bang, bang, boom, boom, kill the bad guy, then you're probably not going to like that movie. But what if your expectation of watching a movie is for it to be something that is beautiful, for something that is well made, because you like movies that are well made? Well, then you're going to probably be satisfied by it. So that's just something that we have to understand about ourselves going into these discussions about life, about oughts themselves of any kind, is what is it about myself? What am I looking for? What's my motivation? What do I need what need do I have that needs to be filled? Why am I doing this? What do I hope to get out of it? And that, I think, is central to being a human being.
Yeah, I was muted. But also, I didn't want to step on if anybody had something. But I agree. Um, so I guess it boils down to how far do you mandate someone to strive toward reality? Where can you, if you can, how do you come up with it? Where is that line?
You dropped out a little bit there for me.
No, I did. Okay.
Yeah,
Now,
me too.
what I was, okay, sorry. Now, what I was saying is, and I hope this is still in the same spirit because I may have lost my train of thought, but it seems, Matthew, that you keep coming back to this ought. We as
I think,
a,
yeah, it has to do
go
with
ahead.
what you value. I think you start valuing something, and the question is whether you should value it or not. I think that may very well be a nonsensical question. So the oughts themselves that end up getting expected to be found based on what we value may be completely nonsensical.
Hmm. Okay, and hmm. So how would you, if at all, how would you guard against that happening, going down the nonsense route versus the, I guess, real route?
I don't think there is a way.
Did he drop out
It's
again?
it's it's I'm talking. Can you hear me?
Heavy, can you hear us?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
I heard Matthew, but there was a big gap there where I didn't hear anything. I didn't know if that was just a pause from you stopping and Matthew starting.
Yeah, that's
No.
our dramatic effect.
Oh, okay.
That's the William Shakespeare school of hangouts. Or
Yeah,
the Bill Shatner school, not the William Shakespeare.
yeah, there you go. Well, they're about the same, aren't they?
Yeah, right. My in case that didn't make any sense, what I was trying to say before, what I'm trying to say is that to apply odds as um, some ultimate objective fact of reality, like that there are odds and there have to be odds, and everything you say that you value, there has to be some reason that you value it. Maybe that itself is nonsense. Maybe the fact that you value something and then what you do based on your values is as far as it goes. Like I've been saying in some videos, like a squirrel valuing nuts. Well, does there need to be a moral objective ought for that squirrel to value nuts? No. Or the ocean that an orca whale swims in. Does there have to be some sort of philosophical framework for that orca whale to swim in the ocean and value the water and the seals that it eats? Of course not. I think that once you get back to that hard fact of the physical world, then applying philosophy to it may very well be pointless and a waste of time, and just, you're spinning your wheels and wasting what little time we have. And if you value time, then that's a problem.
Y'all sure do get deep sometimes. I'm like, whoosh, what'd he say?
To me, that's where the fun in lies.
This is the stuff I drive around when I deliver pizzas. This is what I drive around thinking about all day.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, I'm not much on philosophy. But...
Well, the problem with philosophy is when you start playing with it, it gets exactly this. You start getting to these roadblocks, and you're like, wow, okay, it's going to take me an hour and a half to wrap my head around that. And then I'm probably not even going to be able to come up with any kind of real answer anyway. But to me, that's where, like I said, the fun in lie. So I guess, go ahead.
Oh, well, talking about value, I think it's pretty much the same as what I said earlier. Like if you don't value something, don't try to influence it. Like if you don't value science and science education, don't try to influence science education. And I won't try to influence what the church does.
The problem there is that they think their value supersedes yours, because if God exists, if the Christian belief system is true, or the Judeo-Christian, let's say the Judeo-Christian, just to bring it to the Bible in general, if that is true, then God is ultimate, and nothing that you think can supersede that. So nothing you think is important, nothing you value is more important than what God says. Therefore, if you have a problem with them influencing schooling, the way that school is done, or the secular world, then that is still subject to God. You are subjective to God even if you don't want to be, etc. So everything, if you've got this concept of objectivity, of the ultimate, then start from there. Then nothing anyone else offers, no matter how rational, can possibly match up to it. Like saying the Mona Lisa is the most beautiful painting, and all paintings from now on must be judged against the beauty of the Mona Lisa. And if it's not anywhere close to the Mona Lisa, say Van Gogh's, I think it was Van Gogh that did, was it Van Gogh that did the Scream? I don't remember.
I think so.
Okay, well then that's nowhere near as beautiful as the Mona Lisa, and it doesn't matter what else Van Gogh did because he can't match the Mona Lisa. Well, if you judge your standards like that, where if something doesn't supersede what you're considering the ultimate, starting from there and saying this will, my dad might say, as far as movie stars go, for him it's probably John Wayne, and that is his standard of, or the Marx Brothers for comedy, or something like that. I would probably agree with him about that, actually. But if you start with what you're saying, this is the objective, and go from there, and say, I guess that's, I don't know. I'm gonna have to think about that one, but because I'm basically doing the same thing, talking about reality itself, but we're just spinning our wheels now, and I think that is the whole point of this, is there is a level of ignorance in the deepest recesses of philosophy itself that we may not be able to do anything about. We may just have to accept, or we'll drive ourselves crazy.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, I'm a big classical music guy, and I frequent a classical music forum, and there was a recent post that said, "Why is there no one composing today as good as Beethoven or Mozart?" And it's like, well, there are, but they're just not composing in the same language as them. So there's no point in trying to judge them against them because they're completely different languages. I think that's sort of comparable to what you said. I'm not sure.
No, that definitely is. That's exactly what I was talking about. I just didn't want to step on anybody.
Oh yeah.
I talk too much.
I think where the problem in lies, though, is not so much the, I guess, inability to judge something. It's the unwillingness to. And what I mean is like we were talking about just a second ago, in that some people do not want, let's say, science taught to children. Evolution is theory. Anyway, therefore, it shouldn't be taught until you get to, I guess, junior or senior year in college and you're doing theoretical whatever. Number one, need to understand what theory means in the scientific context. But outside of that, the the problem that I find is that if we have two competing beliefs, we have two things that cannot be, I guess, existence, at least in the way that they're portrayed, then, in my opinion, the ought there should boil down to, let's put both of them on the table and let's test them against one another. And when you're unwilling to do that, when you're willing to remain ignorant of how one affects the other, or potentially even completely negates the other, and still will take actions based on that misconception, in my opinion, then, not even in my opinion, let's say that it's a definitive, you can show that, okay, let's say that I believe 5 times 5 is X. It's not hard for someone to come along and definitively show me that that is wrong. Now, if I still want to ignore how mathematics works, what the multiplication function does, and on and on and on, and even to the point of going and talking to the school board to change the answers in the textbooks, I think we need to be able to, if nothing else, draw a line and say, look, your beliefs are fine as long as they're not affecting other people. But like you pointed out earlier, Matthew, your freedom ends where mine begins. And if your beliefs, even from a understanding, a level that impedes my ability to understand reality, to fix that, something needs to be, I don't know what I want to say done, but I don't think that encompasses what I'm really trying to say.
I think that one thing we're overlooking here is a context that is central to especially Judeo-Christian beliefs. And this is something that we were talking about earlier with feminism and MRAs. It's really to take yourself out of the way you might think. And I don't think in terms of power. I don't think in terms of who has it, who wants it, how much do I have that someone is trying to take away from me. I don't think like that. But a lot of people do. A lot of people think in terms of power. And if you tread on their power, then you are offending them. You're trying to take what's theirs. Even if they don't actually have the power, they only think they do. So when you think in terms of power dynamics, where someone is offending you, then they are impeding your perception of the power that you think you have. So what I'm trying to say is that the standard of, say, let's look at the Department of Defense for the U.S., that being literally the name, the Department of Defense. Well, what exactly is the U.S. military now defending? Is it the people, or is it profit? Is it potential financial gain, economics projected in the future, or is it the actual people of the United States, or the continental United States? What is it? So if you look at it in terms of, well, where is the power? The power is in the money that's going to be made, the money that's already been secured to be made. So when you start stepping on those, that is the sharp end of the stick from the Department of Defense. So what exactly is the Department of Defense defending? They have expanded their defense to the point of defending money they don't even have yet. But that is the power. That's how powerful the United States is. And when you look at that, the religion debate in that context, you're looking at the power of God, the power of the Christian belief system, this ultimate standard of good and evil, of purpose, of everything, that is supposedly the mover and shaker of all things. And as far as a lot of believers are concerned, that is ultimate power that they have a direct line to. Therefore, if you step on that, you're stepping on their perceived power. So when you look at this, all of this in terms of, like, for example, to come back to the creationism debate, you're stepping on their power by. So what I'm just advocating is try to look at this in terms of the power that people perceive you to be taking away from them. I personally don't care about what the power someone thinks they have. If it comes to a matter of them being offended because they think their power is they have power that they don't actually have, and you're offending them by pointing that out, then that's not your problem, it's theirs. But that's all the content to be taken into account when you're having these discussions. That is, again, not a delusion, it's more a matter of optimism versus pessimism in the way people see things. They perceive themselves to be confident or not confident at all, but they believe they are to try to build their confidence even if they're not. That is power itself. Somebody who spends a lot of time on their appearance, if you say anything about their appearance, criticize it in the slightest way, or say something that can be perceived as a criticism, that might be not because they actually feel confident, but because they're so careful to protect their ego as far as their looks are concerned, that the slightest comment they're immediately going to take as an insult. And that's because that's such a raw spot for them. And I think that's the same sort of mentality that I'm talking about, or that is the case with religion. It is such a sore spot that there are, antibodies built around it, such that you can't even mention it without there being a fight involved. And that, I think, is a huge problem. It is an immune system around willful ignorance. And to cut right through that, I mean, if you're like to be optimistically, I try not to even think like power or power I have, power someone else has, but a lot of people do. To be able to cut through that and talk on the same level, to try to see things from their perspective. Look at things. Just my advice is look at things in terms of the power they think they have, and try to see it from their perspective in that regard, if that makes any sense at all.
I think one thing is that, like, you have people that are, like, let's say mega churches. You've got these pastors of these humongous mega churches, and they're feeding people this stuff, and it's fulfilling a need. But it's kind of warping their thinking of reality in a lot of ways. And they're trying to find, a relationship with God or whatever, but the source that they're getting the information from is not quite right, and it affects the way they think. And they're taking it as if, this is correct, this is true. But the source is not really true. But they accept it as it is, and that kind of puts them at odds with, like, teaching science in school and stuff like that. I mean, let's face it, science works. I mean, I'm sitting here looking around my room, and everything I'm looking at came from science, or the scientific method. Everything, as far as I can think of, unless there's a plant growing somewhere. But
see,
science,
what foundation do you have? What foundation do you have to even make that claim, when you wouldn't have science if you didn't have God to start with? God gave you science. So who are you to try to manipulate something he gave you to turn it against him? That's just, you're trying to be your own God.
No, actually, the way my impression is, people, not all Christians, but many, they put down science. they're like science is not from God. It's a perversion of nature or something. It's not what He intended for us to do. But if you accept the belief in a deity, then you can say He put all this stuff here, the raw materials for us to use. He gave us a mind to think, to question, to seek knowledge and learn things, curiosity. Here's all this right here, this tool that we have supposedly have been given from a deity, and we're using it. If there was a deity and He did not want us to have all this science and stuff, He wouldn't have gave us a brain to figure it out. You think?
I think
Well,
He just refuted Christianity and original sin. Anyway,
I did.
that's exactly what I was going to say,
I
except
did.
the other way.
Wow.
Except I was going to say, Heavy, I was going to play devil's advocate here and say, Heavy, the first story in the Bible is, why did man fall? Because we were curious, and what was the thing that we were supposed to avoid? Knowledge. And it is the tree of knowledge that caused the entire downfall. So when you say that God wanted us to have this innate curiosity, it would seem to run contrary to what the very first book of the Bible and the entire reason that mankind has fallen is, which again makes no sense at all, because we all are curious. We all want to know.
Yeah, and
all
that
it
is
takes-
if you accept there is a deity and that He did do all this. If you accept that as fact, then what was the intention? What was going on there? Were we just set up to fall from the very start?
yes.
Yep, absolutely. That's the only thing. That's the only way that apparently God can have his plan come to fruition.
He cares more, the way I understand it, He cares more that we have free will than that there's suffering, that there is anything right or wrong. He would rather we have free will. That is apparently His value, and since He values that, then we should too, and not question that just because that's the way He wants things to be. Therefore, that supersedes anything that we think, any moral oughts that we come up with, because He wants us to have free will, and we have not done right by what He wants, then we are at fault. But I think the only real, this is maybe overly simplistic, but to me, the only thing that is needed to refute the Genesis account is the fact that the world is, 4 billion years old, and the book was only written and supposedly took place, the Genesis account, a few thousand years ago. That means that there's all of that fact that came before, and it's so obviously something that people came up with to try to make sense of things after, that again it just comes back to the fact of the world was there and then the Bible came after. If the Bible came first and then the world, but how would you ever prove something like that? So I think as far as what you're as far as what you're talking about, Heavy, I think that's where you have to start, as far as your perspective of reality has to do with how willing you are to accept. Let me see how to put this. Having somebody to look out for you and not question them. To have the biggest, strongest guy in the neighborhood on your side to protect you, to make you feel better in all cases, at all times. If you need that, then you're going to be willing to accept anything that goes along with that. And again, I'm not sure how much of that is based on who somebody is and what they need versus what they should be held accountable for. And all we can really do is try to work out a standard of, again, where your freedom to swing your arm goes is where it hits my nose. And that, I think, is the real issue here, and just one of the most obvious points of contention is creationism, but it all comes down to that: is what is the ultimate standard, and is that even a realistic concept? Does that make any sense at all for there to be an ultimate standard? Just because you claim you have one, do you? I mean, it's just like mice running around in your head at that point. And what are we all doing here? Are we wasting our time even talking about this? Do we have any control over the fact that we're talking about this? The words that are coming out of my mouth right now, do I have any control over that? It's all of it so much just sophistry. And does any of it matter? And if so, how do you determine the value of it? How do you determine why are we wasting our time right now? And what's the standard of the importance of our time? If the answers to these type of questions, which sound completely like, why would you even ask that? It's just a silly question. Well, that is how people get to a need for an explanation that just encompasses all of it, like God. Well, it's always your answer. Some people need to have an answer to every question. So I've had people tell me I cannot not have an answer to this question. I have to know. I have to have an answer to that. And I say, why? Why do you need that answer? Why do you need to have an answer to every single question? I just got a text from Negation that he lost his internet connection, but I'm glad to see that the call is still going. He'll be back. But do you see what I'm saying, Heavy? I mean, have you ever had somebody tell you that? And hey, Vivo.
Yeah, I think.
Or Viva.
Yeah, I think what you're trying to say is that there has to be, it has to be an answer for every single thing. There has to be an ultimate authority, ultimate truth, and all that. And I'm like, why?
Yeah.
Why do we have to have absolute anything, really? An absolute belief or absolute faith or trust, or there has to be absolute morality. Why do we have to have that? Why do we have to have any kind of absolute thing like that when it doesn't really affect, who we are or anything? We're always going to be uncertain about something. It's part of life. And you mentioned the thing about the bully in the neighborhood, whatever, and he's watching over you and caring for you. Yeah. That made me. But you're not allowed to really question or something. You're giving up something for this protection. And there was something about, like, say, if we had a police, there's an expression I can't think of. Maybe someone will. It's like if we had a police state and they took care of everything for us and protected us, but we have to give up some of our freedom for this protection. Is the protection worth giving up that freedom? And it made me think of, I could be way off base, but religion in a way is like that. It's like you want this ultimate protection and everything, but you have to give up something. You have to give up some freedom, whether it's freedom of thought or free thinking. Like you're going to accept that 2 + 2 = 5 and not that 2 + 2 = 4. 2 + 2 = 4. That's the freedom part. But you have to believe 2 + 2 is 5 to be protected, if that makes sense. I try to say things, and I know it comes out kind of messed up, but I hope you can understand where I was going with that. And that's what I kind of see religion as. It's like you're looking for this ultimate, absolute protection or whatever, but even though you don't want to admit it, you're giving up something. And when we talk to creation, I'm just going to use creationists as an example. When we talk to them, that the geologic column and about the flood, there's no evidence. And the ark was only so big it could only carry so many animals. Even if it was built that big, there have been smaller wooden boats that have been built that have fallen apart. They won't work. So you show them this, but they're giving up that freedom of they're giving up the freedom of the free thought and really allowing that to come in because they want to hang on to this idea of this ultimate protection, the going to heaven and not going to hell bit.
It's like having a contract. Oh, let me see. Okay, I'm live. I'm unmuted rather. Welcome back, man. It's like having a contract that you're not allowed to breach. There's some questions you're not allowed to ask. You start working at a company there, and there'll be like a room that you don't have access to. You don't have a key to it. It's there, and you might even need something out of that room, but you still have to go through someone else to get it. So you accept the contract when you start working for this company that there are going to be some things that you can do, some questions you can ask, some you can't, some elevators you can't ride, some doors you can't go through. some servers that you have no access to. You just have to accept that to work at the company, to be able to get the benefits package, to be able to retire with them. So it's a sort of a cost-benefit analysis that you have to make going into a religion. And the contract, in this case, may very well be something you didn't sign yourself, your parents signed you away to it. So the question again comes back to culpability. How much of it do you actually have control over yourself?
Some doors you can't go through, some servers that you have no access to.
Can you mute yourself there, dude?
Sorry guys.
The video's replaying for him.
Yeah.
That was
Sorry,
your voice.
I'll shut up now. We got a lot of new people in here.
No, that was your voice echoing.
Yeah.
It was that was your voice on the video. Even though you sounded like Darth Vader.
Yeah, I think what goes unspoken though is yes, you're entitled to your belief, and if it's willful ignorance for yourself, but the issue I guess that kind of goes unstated for me is it's they push these beliefs on their children. I don't. Is it malicious? I can't say that, but it does have an impact. It's not just themselves. You know, there is a consequence of their ignorance, right?
Yeah. I was in a conversation with the guy the other day and said he had made the decision not to have kids, and we were talking about beliefs, and he had already set out this whole thing of things he was going to have his kids believe before they were even conceived, before he was even conceived. He was going to force these beliefs into him because he thought he had the right one, and it would be good to pass it down onto him. And that's kind of what I went through growing up, is things were just dictated to me. I trust them. I never questioned them. And not until I took a look at them did I had no justification. But it took until I was about 30. So with my kids, I've tried that same. I've tried not to actually give them my beliefs, let them form their own. But I don't think my parents or the authorities around me had any ill will towards me. I think it's what they believed and what they were taught.
Hello?
Yeah, did I freeze up?
No, just nobody else was talking.
Oh, right. Oh, I
Yeah, I think that's a very important factor of this. Is it malicious or not? Is
Right.
it if somebody is having like an epileptic fit and they punch you in the nose accidentally while they're swinging their arms or however their seizure manifests, at what point do you hold them accountable for that?
Mm-hmm.
If they don't take their medicine, I guess you would, right? In a way.
Well, not necessarily. What if they didn't have, what if they couldn't get their medicine that day? What if it wasn't in their capacity to do anything about? Now, what if they're taking their medicine, but it's suddenly not enough, and they have a
Right.
seizure anyway? I have a cousin who she used to have severe epileptic seizures when she was younger. And then she stopped for a long time because she had her medication balanced. But then she just recently had another one, and she's 18. And I don't know the details of it, but it may very well be that since she's getting older, her hormones are changing. It's not adjusted properly, and she had another seizure. Well, what if she punched somebody in the nose accidentally, and had no control over it? Well, you wouldn't hold her accountable for that. Right? So the question is, at what point do you start holding people accountable for, like Xbox was talking about, do you hold your parents accountable for teaching you something that's not true?
Right, yeah, and I think that is a fuzzy line there.
Is it based on whether or not it's malicious, or what? How do you determine that?
What do you call, because I don't, after going through that and then seeing how I raise my kids, I don't find it right to form their beliefs for them and give them beliefs.
So why not? And
that's
what do you
that's
say?
the question.
Yeah, but what do you say to people who do find it right? You know, that they think that it's in the children's best interest, right?
Right.
Because looking at things from a religious person's perspective, they're trying to save the child's soul, and they're also trying to save your soul by
Sure.
talking to you. Whether or not they have the power to do it, you know, Calvinist, all of that aside, they're trying to help you. They're trying to make things better for you so that you can potentially go to heaven, find Jesus as your Savior, accept salvation, all of that. However, that's their intention, is to help you. So whether or
What?
not they're actually doing it to be malicious or not, to be an ignorant, you know, an arrogant prick, or to be genuinely concerned to the point of the crying because
What?
you're not accepting what they say,
I would
when
actually.
is it? Sorry, go ahead. You know what I'm saying.
No, yeah, I didn't mean to keep cutting you off. I would almost compare it to teaching sex ed to someone that is too young. Teaching belief to someone too young would fall into the same kind of thing. You're you're putting it into people that don't have any kind of defense against what you're telling them. They're not
I
able to actually come to. Uh, they don't have to come to a fully informed decision, but they're coming to these decisions before having any kind of
there's
regard.
there's a dilemma for, I think, believers, though, in that they do. I think mainline Christianity does believe in an age of accountability, right?
Yeah,
But
some do. Yeah.
I was reading a survey of like the homeschool movement, where they were a lot of the homeschool movement is religious. You know, there's part of it that's not. It's, you know, left wing way out there, but they were saying that if you don't get to kids like between the ages of like 8 and 14, that they will not they will look at religion the way they look at a cartoon.
Right.
So there's a belief that they know that they do need to get to kids young. So I mean, that to me, then that's malicious. If you understand that they're so young they can't process what you're doing to them, but yet you feel like the compulsion to indoctrinate, that to me is malicious at that point.
I
See,
think it
the
would if
problem
you
there,
know that. But what if like
another,
my parents didn't have this in mind? Maybe someone taught them to get me younger, but it wasn't. You have to get him at a younger age, or he's not going to do it. And
well,
Yeah.
the problem also with some strains of Christianity, just depending on how it's believed and how it's passed on, is that we are sinners that deserve to have malicious things happen to us.
Right.
We don't have value ourselves. Therefore, if God does something to you or to someone else, wipes out the entire world with the flood, they
Mhm.
deserved it.
Right.
Therefore, there's no room for you to even take offense to someone's malicious behavior, God's malicious edicts.
Yeah.
You have no room to say that. You have no right, no foundation to have any objections to it.
just
So
a side
that's
note
how
on
deep it goes.
just
Oh,
on a side note, I always say that the default position on from a Christian is hell.